Racist Karen humiliates Black FBI agent. On the plane, what happens next is shocking. Welcome to today's tale of high-flying drama and shocking twists, where preconceived notions collide with stark realities at 30,000 feet. In a world where first impressions can mislead even the sharpest among us, anything can happen in a cramped airplane cabin. Today, you'll hear about a passenger with a venomous attitude, a supposed Karen whose prejudice toward a fellow traveler ignites a chain of events nobody could have predicted. Not every hero wears a cape or a visible badge. Some just want to fly quietly under the radar until destiny forces them into action. Fasten your seatbelts and prepare for a journey brimming with tension, suspense, and a karmic conclusion you won't soon forget. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. The late afternoon sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Los Angeles International Airport LAX, illuminating the bustling gate 47B. Passengers crowded near the charging stations, anxiously refreshing their phones for boarding updates as they juggled styrofoam cups from Starbucks and half-eaten sandwiches. Flight 257 to Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport had been delayed by 20 minutes, causing mild grumbles that echoed across the polished tile floor. Among the sea of travelers, a woman in a designer jacket and oversized sunglasses flitted around, constantly checking her gleaming iPhone. Her words cut through the mild airport chatter like a knife saturated with entitlement. She was known, though not by name yet to the gate attendants, as that difficult passenger. She had already scolded a staff member for not announcing the delay sooner. Her frizzy, peroxide blonde hair bobbed each time she lifted her nose to sneer at someone. This woman, who we will come to know as Karen Willoughby, presented herself with the posture of someone perpetually on the brink of outrage. She wore an expensive purse slung over her shoulder and tapped her manicured nails impatiently on the gate counter, demanding to know whether her seat was truly in business class or if there had been a mistake. The gate agents tried to reassure her, but she eyed everyone with suspicion. A few rows behind Karen in the lounge area sat a tall, composed man in a neatly pressed suit. He exuded an aura of quiet confidence, the type that suggested he had seen life from many angles and found a way to remain stoic. His name was Special Agent Marcus Winters of the FBI. Although he did his best to blend in, his posture and purposeful calm drew a few glances from observant onlookers. While Karen's complaints boomed across the airport lounge, Marcus scrolled through emails on his phone, occasionally glancing at the overhead monitors to confirm the delayed boarding time. In the corner, a toddler shrieked, pulling away from a frazzled mother. A group of high school students in matching T-shirts giggled over a viral video on TikTok. Two business partners muttered about an upcoming merger. The patchwork of normal everyday life wove a tapestry of typical pre-flight anxiety and excitement until everything shifted the moment. Karen turned her attention toward Marcus. She cast repeated, scrutinizing glances at him, clearly searching for a reason to be upset, or worse, a reason to feel superior. As the announcer called for business-class passengers to begin boarding, Karen bounded to the front of the line, brandishing her ticket like a scepter. Marcus, also holding a business-class ticket, followed calmly. Karen noticed him standing behind her, tall, composed, with an effortless sense of dignity that seemed to prickle her. She narrowed her eyes, as though questioning his right to be in the same priority boarding group as her. She wanted to say something. That much was obvious, but with the gate agent checking her in, she held her tongue. Little did Karen Willoughby realize that her petty spite was about to catalyze a series of events none of them could have possibly anticipated. Marcus, unbothered by her icy glare, stepped onto the jet bridge. He had no idea that before this flight ended, he'd be forced to reveal far more of himself and his profession than he had planned. And Karen had no inkling that she was about to face a reckoning that would shake her sense of self to the core. The Boeing 767 smelled faintly of recycled air and recently cleaned upholstery. As passengers filed into their seats, flight attendants offered friendly greetings. Karen claimed her seat near the aisle in the business class cabin. She immediately lifted her phone to snap pictures of the overhead bin, complaining it was too small for her carry-on, despite its standard size. She flagged down a flight attendant named Maria, who patiently explained that the bin was designed according to FAA regulations. "But ma'am," Maria added gently, "we can always store your coat or smaller items up front if you'd like." Karen merely rolled her eyes, thrusting her expensive coat into the flight attendant's arms without a word of thanks. As she made a show of wiping down her seat with sanitizing wipes, she noticed Marcus approaching. He offered a polite smile, gesturing to the window seat next to hers. She bristled, her gaze flicking to the seat number on his boarding pass. Are you sure that's your seat?" she demanded, her tone dripping with indignation. Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am, 4A, he replied, still composed. Karen's lips pursed. She cast a meaningful glance around, searching for a flight attendant. When she failed to catch Maria's eye, Karen huffed and turned her full scorn on Marcus. "Look," she said in a theatrical whisper, leaning toward him, "there must be some kind of mistake. I paid top dollar for a comfortable flight, and I don't appreciate random people trying to squeeze in." Marcus said nothing at first. He set his carry-on in the overhead bin, then gracefully took his seat by the window. "I'm sorry for any confusion," he responded evenly, "but I assure you my boarding pass is correct." Karen's cheeks flushed, though whether from embarrassment or fury was unclear. She opened her mouth as though about to launch into a rant, but another passenger brushed by, forcing her to momentarily step aside. Once Marcus was settled, she hovered at the edge of the aisle, looking around as though she wanted an ally to confirm that this man simply didn't belong there. A few inquisitive glances met hers, but nobody rose to join her cause. The rest of the passengers seemed more concerned with stowing their luggage and finding their own seats. Maria returned, politely requesting Karen to sit and buckle up so other business-class passengers could pass by. Karen complied with visible reluctance, snapping her seatbelt into place with an annoyed jerk. She spared one last cold look in Marcus's direction before tossing her purse onto her lap. "This is going to be a long flight," she muttered under her breath, almost as if she wanted Marcus to hear. Marcus allowed himself the tiniest exhale. He had hoped for a quiet journey, a chance to read some crucial documents relevant to his next case briefing. He was heading to Atlanta for a sensitive operation. Normally, he traveled incognito. Official identification remained tucked away, seldom revealed unless necessary. Tonight, though, there was an odd tension in the air, one that made him uneasy, and not just because of the fussy passenger beside him. It was an inexplicable prickle along his spine, a sense that something wasn't right. He couldn't have known just how right he was, for soon a grave threat would emerge, one that would force him to step out of the shadows and wield the full power of his FBI credentials. And in that moment, Karen's petty brand of hostility would pale in comparison to the real danger lurking somewhere on that plane. When the cabin doors finally closed, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard Flight 257 to Atlanta. The typical safety demonstrations ensued. Karen kept glancing sideways at Marcus, her mouth set in a disapproving line. Marcus pretended not to notice. He was scanning the cabin for any sign of the nagging dread that gripped him. Maybe it was merely pre-travel nerves. Yet as a seasoned FBI agent, he had learned to trust that gut feeling. Before long, the aircraft was speeding down the runway, nose tipping skyward. The engines roared, pressing passengers back into their seats. Karen let out a quiet gasp, knuckles whitening on the armrests. As soon as the plane leveled off, she looked around with suspicious eyes. Spotting an empty seat across the aisle, she flagged down Maria again. "I'd like to move," Karen declared. "There's a perfectly good seat right over there." Maria checked her tablet. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but that seat is reserved. The passenger hasn't boarded yet, possibly a late connection." She offered a placating smile. "Once we're at cruising altitude, I can see if there's another seat available, but right now we have to keep everyone seated." Karen bit her lip as though this slight was an unbearable injustice. She glanced again at Marcus, then turned back to Maria. I don't feel comfortable." "He might not be." "Safe, safe," Marcus repeated, arching one eyebrow. He kept his voice soft, not wanting to escalate. He sensed the thinly veiled racism in her words, but he was determined to remain calm. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" Maria asked, her polite smile waning at the edges. Karen folded her arms, forcing a laugh that was more condescending than amused. "Well, is there a problem? Look, you never know who people really are these days. Maybe you should check his ticket again, or run an extra security screening." Maria's cheeks reddened. "I'm quite sure the TSA screening at the airport was thorough. Everyone on this plane cleared security, including your seatmate." "Oh, come on," Karen persisted, lowering her voice in a conspiratorial manner that everyone around them could still hear. "You can't be too careful, right? Some people slip through the cracks." Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment, reining in his temper. He had endured subtle racism before, but rarely in such a confined, public space. He glanced around. A few nearby passengers looked on with discomfort, none quite sure how to intervene. Some frowned at Karen's behavior, while others averted their gaze, hoping the issue would simply blow over. With an apologetic look at Marcus, Maria repeated that all passengers had been properly vetted and asked Karen to please remain respectful. "I can see if we have an alternative seat once we reach cruising altitude," Maria reiterated. "Until then, I need everyone seated with seatbelts on." Karen grudgingly relented. "Fine," she spat, turning away from Marcus and digging through her purse. Marcus directed a tight smile at Maria, appreciative of her calm approach. He returned to staring out of the window, only half focused on the glittering lights below as the plane ascended. Deep down, he felt the tension building like a thundercloud, and he suspected it wouldn't dissipate easily. Even so, he resolved to remain patient. Years of FBI training had taught him that confrontation rarely solved matters unless absolutely necessary. Yet it was only the start. The flight had barely begun, and already Karen was stoking an undercurrent of hostility. Soon, though, Karen's spite would seem trivial compared to the shocking incident that was poised to rock the entire cabin. By the time it was over, loyalties would be tested, and fates would be intertwined in a way that nobody, least of all Karen, could have possibly anticipated. 40 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign blinked off. Karen immediately shoved her purse under the seat in front of her, stood up, and scanned the surrounding rows. She didn't see any vacant seats in the business class section that weren't already occupied. But she spotted a flight attendant slipping through the curtain that separated business from coach. With a determined set to her jaw, she started after them. Marcus tried to focus on the FBI documents open on his laptop, a swirling labyrinth of data about stolen identities, arms smuggling, and possible inside leaks. Yet Karen's footsteps barely receded before she came back, escorted by another flight attendant, who kindly but firmly explained that the flight was almost full. There was only one empty seat in business class, the one originally assigned to a passenger who was listed as a late transfer. Company regulations prevented them from reassigning that seat until they were absolutely certain the passenger wouldn't board. Karen begrudgingly returned to her seat, crossing her arms. She glowered at Marcus for a long moment before ripping a glossy fashion magazine out of her purse and flipping through it with more force than necessary. A steward came by offering drinks, sparkling water, juices or cocktails. Karen snapped up a glass of white wine while Marcus asked for water. He wasn't about to dull his senses, not with his creeping suspicion that something bigger was brewing in the background. Gulping the wine with surprising speed, Karen soon asked for a second. Then she tried to watch one of the in-flight movie selections, yet her attention kept drifting to Marcus. He was reading an article with intensity, occasionally underlining something with the stylus on his tablet. His expression, though measured, seemed troubled. "Working on something important, are you?" she asked in a thinly veiled barb. "Planning your next big job?" Marcus offered a polite nod without looking away from his screen. He had no desire to stoke further conflict. "Yes, ma'am," he said simply. Karen let out a derisive sniff. "Fancy," she murmured, her tone thick with disapproval. Nearby passengers either tried to ignore the tension or pretended to be asleep. The overhead lights in the cabin dimmed, and the pilot announced they might encounter mild turbulence. Karen finished her second glass of wine and set it down sharply on the tray. It was then that something made her frown. She leaned forward, squinting at the row ahead of them. "What's that woman doing?" she asked nobody in particular. A slender woman in the seat ahead was rummaging in her purse, pulling out what looked like a small pouch. She seemed to pass something discreetly to her seatmate, who quickly slipped it into his backpack. Karen's eyes glimmered with suspicion. Of course, the item could have been anything: a pair of earbuds, a pack of gum, medication. But Karen seemed almost eager to suspect the worst. She shifted her attention back to Marcus. "Did you see that?" she demanded. He glanced up, briefly noticing the exchange. It hadn't struck him as overtly suspicious. People share items on planes all the time. But it did stand out enough that he made a mental note. "Not sure what you mean," Marcus replied. Karen rolled her eyes with dramatic flair. "Of course not," she muttered sarcastically. "Didn't want to see it, more like. Typical." Marcus's patience was wearing thin. He inhaled quietly and resumed reading. But a part of him filed away Karen's observation. While it was probably nothing, his intuition told him to keep an eye on the row ahead, just in case. And so, unbeknownst to Karen, she had actually nudged Marcus's attention towards something that would ultimately unravel a terrifying turn of events. If not for her idle suspicion, Marcus might not have looked closer at that unassuming couple in row 3. He might have ignored the small movements, the anxious glances. He might not have realized they were holding something far more dangerous than a phone charger or stick of gum. Soon, the plane would lurch into chaos, forcing the cabin into a fear-laced unity. And in that crucible of danger, each person's true character would be laid bare. Karen, for all her hostility, would discover that the man she had insulted was the only one equipped to handle the crisis. But that moment of realization would come at a steep price. Time crawled along. Outside, night had fully fallen, and the lights of distant cities were faint jewels scattered below. Marcus tried to immerse himself in his briefing materials, but Karen's whispered remarks kept intruding. She had drained another glass of wine, which seemed to embolden her in voicing half-formed suspicions. She whispered to Marcus at one point, "I bet those two up there are smugglers. I can just feel it." He almost chuckled at the outlandishness of her statement, but reminded himself that he was not at liberty to share details of his real role. He only said, "It's best not to assume." The irony of telling that to someone so riddled with prejudice did not escape him. Elsewhere in the cabin, the flight attendants bustled with drink carts. politely offering snacks. There was a subdued hush, the hush of passengers settling in for a cross-country flight, checking the time, adjusting the air vents, dozing off. Only a smattering of overhead reading lights glowed, and the gentle hum of the engines provided a hypnotic backdrop. Marcus's phone vibrated quietly in his jacket pocket. He had set it to airplane mode, but certain FBI-issued devices had secure internal messaging systems that occasionally connected via special networks if needed. Glancing down at the screen, he noticed a coded message flash across. It was brief, urgent, possible threat on board, remain alert. His breath caught. Why would the Bureau send such a message now? Could they have intelligence that someone on this flight was involved in criminal activity or terrorism? The FBI rarely meddled in commercial flights unless there was credible intel. Suddenly, Karen's random suspicion felt less random. Almost instinctively, Marcus's eyes flicked to the row ahead, the same row Karen had pointed out. The two individuals had parted ways. One got up and headed toward the lavatory, carrying a backpack. The other sat quietly, eyes darting around. Marcus observed them for a moment. The tension in his gut tightened. Sensing his shift in attention, Karen smirked. "You see," she hissed, leaning close enough for Marcus to catch a whiff of her perfume. "I told you something is off about them." Marcus had no intention of confiding in her, but the conversation was about to pivot in a shocking direction. Karen's next words were unexpected. "Why don't you go tell the flight attendant? Look, I might have overreacted about you. But if you happen to have any experience, maybe you can help. I just want a safe flight." It was the first time Karen even hinted at an apology, albeit a very indirect one. Marcus resisted the urge to press her. He simply said, "I'll keep an eye on them. Don't worry." Karen's brow furrowed, as though she sensed that Marcus was more than he seemed. "Who are you, anyway?" Marcus hesitated. "Just a business traveler," he replied, giving her a tight smile. Karen eyed him suspiciously, but let it go. For a moment, her expression softened, almost vulnerable, as if beneath her vitriol lay a deep-seated fear. Marcus recognized that fear, flying sometimes unearthed, hidden anxieties. But the moment passed quickly. She turned away, rummaging in her purse again to find her phone charger. Meanwhile, Marcus quietly unbuckled his seatbelt. He leaned forward, peering into row 3. The man who had gone to the lavatory still hadn't returned. The woman was flipping nervously through an in-flight magazine, biting her lip. Marcus noted the silhouette of a bulge under the magazine. Something she was trying to hide? After a minute, the man reappeared from the lavatory. He slipped back into his seat, and the two exchanged furtive looks. Marcus didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the sense of foreboding only escalated with every second. Within moments, a flight attendant announced mild turbulence ahead, instructing everyone to fasten their seatbelts. The woman in row 3, wide-eyed, whispered something to her companion. He nodded, setting his hand protectively on the backpack. Marcus quietly clicked his belt back into place, adrenaline slowly seeping into his veins. If the FBI had credible intel, and these two were indeed the reason for that urgent message, things could escalate quickly. Still, he had no authorization to make an arrest or approach them unless they posed an immediate threat. He'd have to wait, watch, and be prepared to act if necessary. As Marcus considered his plan, Karen turned to him again, her voice low, urgent. "You know something," she whispered accusingly. "I can tell. You're not just some random guy. If something happens on this plane, you better do something." Marcus kept his eyes forward, heart pounding. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," he said, voice barely audible. But it would indeed come to that. The tension in the cabin was about to boil over in a way that would stun everyone aboard, sending them hurtling into a fight for their lives. And the catalyst for that conflict would be far more shocking than Karen's petty prejudices or even the suspicious bulge under a magazine. By the time the flight touched down, at least one passenger would be in custody, and several others would never look at air travel the same way again. It happened in a blink. The plane suddenly jolted at first. It seemed like standard turbulence, but the force was stronger. Overhead bins rattled, and passengers gasped. The flight attendants hurried to strap themselves in. An uneasy murmur rippled through the cabin. Then came the second jolt, more violent this time, as though the plane had hit a massive air pocket. Karen let out a startled squeal, clutching her armrest. Marcus's grip on his seat tightened, but he kept his composure. He was far more concerned with row 3. Through the dim light, he saw the man stand up, ignoring the flight attendant's orders to remain seated. The man clutched his backpack, moving unsteadily toward the aisle. A steward rushed over. "Sir, please sit down. The captain says we're experiencing heavy turbulence." The man glared, ignoring the request. Behind him, his companion rose too, fear etched on her face. Marcus's heart pounded. This was it, the moment he dreaded. Suddenly, the man yanked something from his backpack. It glinted under the cabin's overhead light, a compact firearm. The flight attendant froze, and a collective gasp coursed through the cabin. A wave of terror rippled across the passengers. Some screamed, others ducked down. Karen's eyes went wide with horror. She shrank back into her seat, her breathing turned ragged, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Marcus's instincts kicked in. Carefully, he slid a hand toward his jacket, where he kept his FBI identification and his own concealed weapon. But he had to be cautious. One wrong move, and the hijacker might start firing. The man raised the weapon, brandishing it at the flight attendant, then scanning the business class cabin. His partner stepped forward, trembling but resolute. In a heavily accented whisper, she hissed at him to keep calm. "We have to deliver the package," she muttered under her breath. Marcus's mind raced. A hijacking? Or perhaps they intended to smuggle something into the cockpit, or force a diversion. He needed more information. Yet, with the plane still experiencing rough air, simply standing up could send him crashing into seats or draw the hijacker's aim directly to him. The male hijacker, no older than 30, with unkempt hair, turned to the stunned passengers. "Everyone stay seated," he roared, voice quivering with adrenaline. "We don't want to hurt anyone, but we will if we must." A fearful hush settled over the cabin. A baby wailed somewhere in the back. Another wave of turbulence shook the plane, nearly toppling the hijacker, but he gripped the seat next to him for balance. Marcus caught Karen's eye. She looked utterly petrified, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Her mouth worked soundlessly, as if no words could escape. In that moment, Marcus saw her prejudice evaporate, replaced by raw terror, and he, ironically, was the best hope she had. He gave her a faint nod, trying to reassure her, silently conveying that he had a plan, or at least that he would do something. In the cockpit, the pilot had to be aware something was happening. The flight attendants, pinned down, wouldn't be able to discreetly notify them without risking a bullet. Marcus considered his limited options. He needed to wait for the right moment. If he confronted them prematurely, the hijacker might start firing and endanger innocent lives. If he waited too long, they might try to break into the cockpit. The plane shook again, rattling teeth and nerves alike. With one swift motion, the woman yanked open the overhead bin above row 3. She withdrew a small black case, locked with combination clasps. The man pressed the gun to his side, ordering the flight attendant to open the cockpit door. The attendant stammered that it was impossible, only the pilot or co-pilot could unlock it from inside. And there was a specific emergency protocol. Fury twisted the hijacker's features. "Then call them," he barked. As the flight attendant shakily reached for the intercom, Marcus reached inside his jacket. The time for subtlety was fast disappearing. He had to reveal himself. He unclipped the holster of his gun, carefully shifting it. Karen's eyes noticed, and she nearly gasped out loud, but she caught herself, pressing a trembling hand to her lips. Marcus slowly rose, hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. His voice projected calm authority. "Easy, friend," he said. "We don't want any accidents here." The hijacker whirled, pointing the gun at Marcus. The plane lurched again, and the hijacker wobbled, struggling to stay upright. "Sit down," he snarled. Marcus's hand hovered near his pocket, where his FBI badge was. "I can help you," Marcus offered, voice steady. "Let's talk." "Talk about what?" the hijacker demanded, his eyes wide and crazed. "They need to open the cockpit, or I'll blow this plane out of the sky." Fear pulsed in every row, but Marcus took a small step forward. "There's no need for that. I'm a federal," he caught himself. He didn't want to escalate. "I understand you have demands. Let's work them out." The woman brandished the black case. "We have to land somewhere else, you hear?" she yelled, her accent trembling. "We can't go to Atlanta. If we land in Atlanta, they'll kill us. The cargo has to go to—" The man silenced her with a harsh glare. "Quiet!" Then, pointing the gun at Marcus, he hissed, "Move back, or I shoot you first." Marcus's pulse thundered in his ears. He raised his hands higher, feigning compliance, while slowly shifting to shield as many passengers as he could behind him. The flight attendant cowered near row, 2 tears streaming. The entire plane seemed suspended in a state of collective horror. Karen pressed herself back into her seat, quietly sobbing. In that moment, the hatred she'd shown toward Marcus had transformed into desperate hope that he would somehow fix this. She clutched the seatbelt so tightly her fingers turned white. Her illusions of superiority had vaporized in the face of an immediate, life-threatening crisis. All she cared about now was survival, but how to defuse the situation without triggering a firefight. The cockpit door was locked, and the hijackers had a gun. One shot could tear open the pressurized cabin, or at least start a panic leading to injuries or worse. Marcus's mind worked at lightning speed, trying to recall the standard procedures in mid-air hijack scenarios. But with every second, the tension mounted. Soon, the last shred of control would snap, and Marcus would have to make a choice that could mean life or death for everyone aboard. The path of non-violence was narrowing, and soon he'd reveal his badge, stepping into the role he'd tried to keep hidden. When that moment came, the entire plane would hold its breath. And what happened next would confirm whether fate could be altered by a single man's courage, or if the entire flight was doomed from the start. Marcus took a deep breath, his gaze sliding from the trembling flight attendant to the 2 hijackers. The man's gun wavered slightly as more turbulence rattled the plane. This might be the only opening Marcus would get. Calmly, Marcus reached into his inside pocket, extracting his leather FBI credentials. "Don't shoot," he said steadily, holding out his badge so they could see it. "I'm a special agent with the FBI, Marcus Winters. I can help you, but you have to work with me." The hijackers exchanged alarmed looks. The man jabbed the gun in Marcus's direction. "FBI, I don't believe you. Why would the FBI be on this flight?" "I'm traveling to Atlanta on official business," Marcus explained, taking care not to approach too quickly. "If your problem is with local authorities there, we can negotiate. We can contact someone to reroute if there's a legitimate concern for your safety. Nobody wants bloodshed." The woman's hands shook as she clutched the black case. "We are dead if we go to Atlanta," she cried. "We took something from very dangerous people. We thought we could trade it. They're waiting for us to land. They'll kill us." Marcus saw fear in her eyes, the kind that runs bone deep. This wasn't some random act of terrorism, it was desperation. "What did you steal?" he asked quietly. She looked at the man, who nodded curtly. Then she opened the black case, revealing rows of small plastic vials, each labeled with cryptic markings. Marcus's eyes widened. Was it a biological agent? A drug? Possibly some deadly synthetic chemical? His mind raced. The FBI had been monitoring chatter about new narcotics flooding the East Coast from an unidentified network. Could these vials be part of that network? "There's a buyer in Mexico," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "We have to deliver it, or they'll come after our families. But if we land in Atlanta, the men we stole from will be waiting," the man snarled, brandishing the gun again. "We need to divert this plane somewhere else, maybe south to Texas or even Florida. Then we can cross the border." Marcus kept his tone measured. "That's not how commercial flights work. The cockpit crew can't just change course without clearance. And you're putting everyone's life at risk. We have no choice," the man yelled, voice cracking. "Open the cockpit door or I'll shoot." Marcus raised his hands higher. "I can talk to the pilot on the intercom. Let me do that." As he inched toward the intercom, the male hijacker gestured for him to move faster. The plane trembled once more, lights flickering briefly. Karen whimpered, her face pressed against the seat in front of her. Around them, some passengers prayed silently, others hugged loved ones or wept in muffled terror. Finally, Marcus reached the phone attached to the bulkhead. He pressed the button that connected him to the cockpit. Before the pilot answered, Marcus looked back, taking stock of the hijacker's positions. The man stood in the aisle, the gun sweeping from side to side, while the woman crouched near row 3 with the black case. Passengers were frozen. "This is Special Agent Marcus Winters," he said into the intercom, trying not to sound too urgent for fear the hijacker would suspect a trick. "We have a situation. The hijackers want to divert the plane. They're armed. Let's keep everyone calm." A tense pause. Then the pilot's voice crackled through. "Agent, are you certain we can't talk them down? We're not authorized to deviate unless we have no other choice. And the cockpit door stays locked unless the FAA or the higher-ups instruct otherwise." Marcus glanced at the hijackers. "We're negotiating. They claim they have contraband that puts them in danger if we land in Atlanta. They want to go somewhere else." While speaking, Marcus discreetly slipped a hand into his jacket, switching on the secure transmitter the FBI used. If he could just get a signal out, the Bureau might be able to coordinate an emergency landing with specialized response teams. The trick was stalling until help was ready on the ground. "We are not waiting," the hijacker snarled, lunging toward Marcus and pressing the gun barrel against his shoulder. Marcus tensed, the cold metal biting into his suit jacket. "Tell them we need to land somewhere else now, or we start shooting." From the corner of his eye, Marcus saw Karen trembling. Her disbelief was palpable. She had boarded this flight expecting a routine trip. Yet here she was, pinned in her seat, while a man threatened to kill an FBI agent. Her face spoke volumes: shock, shame at her earlier behavior, and raw fear. If she had known who Marcus was from the start, would she have treated him differently? Almost certainly. But regret had little place in this crisis. Marcus's training took over. He forced himself to sound calm. "Listen," he told the pilot over the intercom, "the hijackers demand we change course immediately." "We can't," the pilot whispered, clearly shaken. "The FAA has us on a route. We're barely halfway to Atlanta. Diverting mid-route is complicated. We'd need to ensure we have enough fuel." "What is this nonsense?" barked the male hijacker, pressing the gun harder. "Do it, or I'll kill him right now." As if on cue, the plane convulsed in another burst of turbulence. The hijacker lost his footing, stumbling sideways. In that split second, Marcus tried to turn the gun away, but the hijacker recovered too quickly. The woman screamed, "Don't shoot!" Nobody fired a shot yet, but the tension was thicker than the cabin air. Marcus realized that if he couldn't de-escalate soon, someone would be seriously hurt or worse. He locked eyes with the hijacker. "I can get you out of this," Marcus said in a low, urgent tone. "I'm FBI. I have contacts, but you need to trust me. Dropping a commercial plane in the middle of nowhere is impossible. You'll be caught the second we land." The man's resolve faltered for a split second. He stared down at the gun in his shaking hand, wrestling with the magnitude of his predicament. But then he hardened his expression, fueled by desperation. "If we do nothing, we're dead anyway," he whispered. Marcus carefully stepped closer, hands raised. He was within arm's reach of the gun now. A single miscalculation could cost him his life, but it was the only way. He tried to project calm. "We can find a solution. But not if you threaten innocent people." Karen, her voice trembling, suddenly spoke up from behind them. "Yes, please just listen to him. He can help you. Don't do anything violent." Marcus shot her a fleeting look, surprised. She was advocating for peace, perhaps for the first time that flight. Her eyes were pleading, shining with tears. This was the same Karen who had earlier treated Marcus with contempt. Now, she was pinning her hopes on him. The male hijacker sneered at her, but for a moment he seemed almost disarmed by her plea. For a heartbeat, time stretched. Then the pilot's voice crackled again over the intercom. "Agent Winters, if you can subdue them, we'll reroute to the nearest airport for an emergency landing. Air marshals are en route to intercept us if we can. Air marshals!" The hijacker roared, eyes flaring. "You're lying!" He jerked backward, as if preparing to fire. Marcus's training coiled like a spring. In a single swift motion, he twisted to the side, grabbing the hijacker's arm. The gun went off with a deafening crack. A bullet tore through the overhead panel, sending sparks showering down. Screams erupted throughout the cabin. Karen shrieked, ducking down. The woman with the black case clutched it protectively, tears streaking her cheeks. Marcus wrested the hijacker's wrist, forcing the gun downward. Another shot exploded, grazing the floor between seats. More screams. Passengers huddled, covering their heads. The hijacker was strong, desperation fueling his struggle. But Marcus had years of hand-to-hand combat training. He leveraged his weight, twisting the hijacker's arm until the weapon clattered onto the floor. Karen's eyes darted, focusing on the gun sliding across the aisle. Without thinking, she lunged forward, hooking the toe of her high-heeled shoe around the gun to prevent it from skidding away. Meanwhile, the hijacker drove his elbow into Marcus's ribs. Pain flared, but Marcus held his grip. The plane rolled slightly, buffeted by yet another pocket of turbulence. Crying out, the hijacker managed to break free. He shoved Marcus backward, fumbling toward the floor for the gun. Karen, wide-eyed, kicked the gun further away. "No!" she screamed, panic fueling her reflexes. The hijacker turned on her with a murderous snarl, but Marcus tackled him from behind, slamming him against a seat. The man's head struck the headrest with a dull thud, and he collapsed, dazed. Breathing hard, Marcus signaled the flight attendant to retrieve the gun. Karen, trembling, stepped back as the flight attendant quickly grabbed the weapon and rushed it out of reach. The woman hijacker wailed in dismay, clutching her case. She looked around, saw no immediate ally, then bolted toward the back of the plane. Brandishing a small knife she had produced from somewhere in her coat, Marcus yelled, "Stop her!" But she was already weaving through the chaos of frightened passengers. He glanced back at the man, who lay half-conscious near row 3. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. Marcus had no time to tend to him. The woman still posed a threat, and those vials might be lethal. For an instant, Marcus's eyes met Karen's. She was shell-shocked, face ashen, tears on her cheeks. Yet there was a flicker of something else in her gaze, gratitude, perhaps, and a glimmer of remorse. Whatever tension existed between them before this flight was now overshadowed by life or death stakes. With a nod, Marcus sprinted after the woman, plunging into the narrow aisle as the plane's interior was lit by the sporadic glow of overhead lights and terrified phone screens. Marcus barreled into the coach cabin, weaving around passengers who stood or knelt in fear. He glimpsed the fleeing hijacker near the rear galley, struggling to open a door she clearly didn't know how to operate mid-flight. Flight attendants yelled for everyone to remain calm. The oxygen in the cabin seemed charged with panic. Vials, a gun, desperate criminals somehow. It had all escalated within the blink of an eye. Marcus clenched his jaw, pushing past the surge of adrenaline to maintain clarity. He needed to apprehend the woman and secure those vials before she did something catastrophic, like trying to open the emergency exit or threaten a passenger. She caught sight of him approaching and brandished her small knife. "Stay back!" she screamed, backing toward the lavatories. The black case rattled in her arms. Passengers huddled in their seats, eyes wide. "If you come any closer, I'll..." Marcus halted. "Hands up. It's over. Your partner is down. You can still get out of this alive. Put the knife down." Tears streamed down her face, mixing with sweat. "You don't understand. I'm dead if I let them catch me." Marcus took a slow step forward. "We can protect you. The FBI. We can offer witness protection if you cooperate. But not if you kill anyone or bring down this plane." For a moment, she seemed to consider. Her hand shook on the knife handle. A long, pregnant pause stretched, so thick with tension that the frightened passengers scarcely breathed. Marcus inched closer, aware that any sudden move might send her over the edge. Then came a guttural scream from behind, the male hijacker, half dazed, stumbling into the coach cabin. Blood dripped from his forehead. He spotted the woman, locked eyes with her. "Run!" he bellowed, though his voice was weak. Her gaze snapped to him, then back at Marcus. Something broke inside her, a final surge of desperation. She whipped around, flinging open the nearest lavatory door, trying to barricade herself inside. Marcus lunged, grabbing at her arm. She cried out, dropping the black case onto the floor. It popped open on impact, scattering the vials across the narrow aisle. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers, as though they expected the vials to break or unleash some toxic gas. But the thick plastic tubes remained intact, rolling like marbles. Marcus cursed under his breath. The male hijacker lunged for one of the vials, as if to use it as leverage. "No!" Marcus yelled, releasing the woman to intercept the man. The woman shrank back into the lavatory, knocking her head against the sink. She sank to the floor, sobbing in confusion. Meanwhile, the man reached for a single vial, but Marcus's foot came down on his wrist, halting his movement. "Enough," Marcus hissed. He knelt, forcibly pinning the man's arm. The hijacker glared, chest heaving. "You're done." Passengers watched in trembling silence. A few flight attendants hurried forward, carefully gathering the scattered vials and placing them back into the case. The woman stayed huddled in the lavatory, shoulders shaking with sobs. "It's not my fault," she mumbled, voice ragged. "They made us do this." Marcus pressed the man's shoulder into the floor. The hijacker growled, trying to resist, but he was disoriented from the head injury and losing strength quickly. "Stay down," Marcus ordered, retrieving zip ties from an emergency kit a flight attendant had brought. With practiced efficiency, he bound the man's wrists. A second flight attendant appeared with more ties. Marcus gestured toward the woman, who offered no resistance as she was gently pulled from the lavatory. Amid the swirl of tension, the overhead speaker cracked. "Agent Winters, is everything under control?" It was the pilot, voice thick with concern. "We've contacted authorities, and there's an air marshal on the ground, ready for an emergency landing if you can hold things steady." Marcus exhaled, shoulders slumping in relief as adrenaline drained out of him. "Yes, the hijackers are subdued," he replied, pressing the button on a nearby intercom phone. "We have the weapon, and I have them in custody. We need to land as soon as possible. They have contraband that must be secured." A ragged cheer broke out among the passengers. Relief, disbelief, and gratitude poured forth. Some were sobbing openly, others thanking Marcus with trembling voices. Marcus looked around at the fear-stricken faces, taking in the enormity of what had just transpired. It all happened so fast. yet every second had been suspended in a precarious balance between life and death. He led the flight attendant in carefully transferring the male hijacker into a jump seat, strapping him in tightly. The woman was similarly restrained, but not before she surrendered the last of her vials. A wave of stunned relief settled into the cabin, though everyone remained shaken. In the midst of the chaos, Karen appeared, her face pale and streaked with mascara. She approached Marcus hesitantly, as though unsure how to address him now that she knew he was an FBI agent. Her lips parted, but no words came out initially. Marcus saw in her eyes an apology that transcended speech. She seemed ready to collapse with relief, gratitude, and likely a lingering sense of guilt for how she had treated him earlier. He gave a nod, silently acknowledging her unspoken remorse. Just then, the pilot announced that they were diverting to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport for an emergency landing. Passengers collectively breathed a sigh of relief. In less than an hour, they would be on the ground, swarmed by law enforcement, paramedics and press. The harrowing ordeal would end, but its impact would leave deep imprints on everyone involved. And for Karen, especially, the experience was far from over. She would soon be faced with the reality of her own prejudices and the humiliating realization that the man she had so casually dismissed was the very one who saved her life. Karma, in all its poetic justice, was about to land on that tarmac right alongside them. The landing in Dallas-Fort Worth was tense but smooth. A hush fell over the passengers, broken only by the murmured prayers of those who had endured the harrowing hijack attempt. Emergency vehicles flashed their red and blue lights through the windows, chasing away the darkness of the airfield. The plane taxied to a secure zone far from the terminal, where heavily armed FBI agents, airport police, and medical teams waited. As soon as the aircraft's doors opened, the hijackers were taken into custody, their weapons and contraband carefully catalogued by a hazmat team. The black case of vials was placed in a secure container. Marcus supervised, flashing his credentials. The tension in his posture finally released as the men and women in bulletproof vests confirmed that the crisis was contained. Passengers slowly disembarked, some trembling, others sobbing with relief. Flight attendants guided them off the jet bridge, where paramedics offered blankets and water. Local news vans had already converged outside the airport's secure perimeter, cameras rolling. Marcus fielded immediate questions from the lead FBI agent on site, providing the quick version of events. The official debrief would come later, but for now, the press of urgent responsibilities took precedence. Through the haze of adrenaline come down, Marcus noticed Karen standing nearby, looking adrift among the swirl of passengers. She clutched her designer purse, her expression vulnerable. She caught his gaze and hesitantly stepped closer, glancing around as though worried someone might overhear. But the chaos was loud, with sirens and engine noise overshadowing most conversations. Karen mustered a wavering smile, though tears still glistened in her eyes. "I just wanted to say thank you," she began, her voice trembling. She swallowed hard, then forced herself to continue. "And I'm sorry. I acted like a fool. I had no right to treat you the way I did." Marcus exhaled, nodding. He studied her for a moment, noting how fear had peeled back layers of her bravado. Her shoulders trembled, betraying how shaken she truly was. He recognized that her apology was sincere, born from shock, gratitude, and perhaps a newly discovered humility. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder, ignoring the earlier insults and focusing on the human moment. "Thank you. I appreciate it," he said softly. "It was a rough flight for everyone." Karen's eyes brimmed with tears. "You saved my life," she whispered. "I was so blinded by prejudice, I guess, that I didn't even see who you really were. And when it mattered, you didn't hesitate. You saved us all." Marcus offered a small, sad smile. "I'm just glad everyone's okay." Let's focus on that. Karen nodded, biting her lip. She looked away, as though words were inadequate to capture the swirl of regret and relief inside her. Finally, she stepped back, letting the paramedics examine her. Marcus turned his attention to the throng of law enforcement waiting to debrief him. As the night wore on, Marcus gave a preliminary statement. The FBI's local field office took custody of the hijackers. He learned more details. The vials contained a potent synthetic drug that had been developed overseas and smuggled into the United States. The pair had stolen it from an organized crime group based in Atlanta, hoping to flee and sell it elsewhere before the cartel caught them. Their plan had been to force the plane off course to escape likely death upon landing. In a surreal twist, once the local press learned that an off-duty FBI agent had thwarted the hijacking, they clamored for an interview. Marcus, typically media-averse, politely declined, deferring to the Bureau's public relations protocol. He only wanted to see the other passengers to safety. But as morning approached and the exhausted travelers were transported to a hotel or rebooked on new flights, he caught a glimpse of Karen one last time near the baggage claim area. She no longer looked like the entitled woman from the start of their journey. Her makeup was smeared, her hair disheveled, and a heavy weariness lingered in her posture. Despite her disarray, she managed to find Marcus amid the crowd. She bowed her head in acknowledgement, tears slipping down her face. She didn't need to speak. Her expression carried 1,000 unspoken apologies and an equally profound gratitude. Marcus gave her a nod of understanding. Their interaction that day had spanned the spectrum of human conflict and resolution, from prejudice and hostility to mortal peril, and, ultimately, a strange sense of unity. Karen's personal reckoning was her own burden to carry, but at least she seemed to be confronting it with honesty. By the time the sun peeked over the horizon, Special Agent Marcus Winters was on his way to debrief with the local FBI office, battered from the ordeal but resolute. He had walked onto that plane hoping for a discreet trip to Atlanta, only to become the catalyst for averting a disaster. Yet in the process, he witnessed a small spark of redemption in a person who had begun the journey as his most vocal critic. It was proof that sometimes people could change when confronted with the stark reality that we are all equally fragile under the threat of violence and equally reliant on each other's humanity to survive. 2 weeks later, Karen Willoughby found herself in a quiet corner of her upscale home outside Los Angeles, sipping coffee from a mug that read "Relax." The irony wasn't lost on her. Every time she raised the mug to her lips, she remembered the flight, how she hadn't been able to relax, how she had unleashed her prejudices on an innocent man, only to rely on him when life or death stared her in the face. On the flight back from Dallas to Los Angeles, once the FBI cleared her to travel, Karen spent the entire journey in a contemplative trance. For the first time, she questioned the biases she had absorbed throughout her life, the petty judgments and sense of entitlement that had ruled her. The words, "Some people slip through the cracks," echoed in her mind, haunting her. Those words, directed at Agent Winters, now felt like poison on her tongue. In the days following her return, she had nightmares about the hijacking, waking in a cold sweat. She realized that not only had she been physically saved by someone she had belittled, but her prejudices had nearly prevented her from acknowledging his humanity in the first place. The shame felt overwhelming. One morning she turned on the TV to catch the local news. They reported updates about the hijackers. They had pled guilty to charges of attempted hijacking, possession of illegal substances, and assault. The FBI released a statement praising Special Agent Marcus Winters for his bravery. A photograph flashed on screen of Marcus in his FBI attire, stoic as ever. Karen's breath caught. She turned off the TV, unable to bear the collision of gratitude and guilt swirling inside her. She owed that man an apology, a real one. But how to reach an FBI agent? She spent hours online, searching for a way to contact the bureau. Eventually, she found a general email for public inquiries. She composed a heartfelt letter explaining that she was a passenger on Flight 257, that she had initially treated Agent Winters poorly, and that she wanted to personally thank him and apologize for her behavior. She pressed send, uncertain if her message would ever reach him. Weeks passed without a response. Karen tried to let it go, focusing instead on self-improvement. She read books about empathy, watched documentaries, and even started volunteering at a local community center. Small gestures she hoped might balance the karmic scales. Yet, deep down, she yearned for closure, to convey to Marcus that his actions had sparked a profound transformation in her outlook. Chapter 11. A chance meeting. Fate had other plans. 4 months after the hijacking, Karen found herself in Washington, D.C., accompanying a friend who worked for a public relations firm. Her friend was organizing a charity gala at the Willard Intercontinental, raising funds for rehabilitating at-risk youth. Karen was merely tagging along, hoping to see the nation's capital and lend a hand as needed. She never expected that Marcus Winters would be in attendance. The ballroom shimmered with elegant decor, glimmering chandeliers casting soft light over round tables draped in crisp white linens. Attendees mingled, glasses of champagne in hand, discussing philanthropic initiatives. Karen felt out of place at first, still grappling with the memory of her past behavior. She straightened her modest evening gown, reminding herself that she was there to do good, to support her friend. Then, as she passed a cluster of well-dressed men discussing law enforcement partnerships with youth programs, she heard a voice deep, calm, the voice that had commanded the hijacker to drop his gun. Her heart hammered. She turned, scanning faces, and there he was, Marcus Winters, wearing a sharp suit, engaged in conversation with a local community leader. Karen nearly dropped the glass of sparkling water she was holding. For a moment, her nerves betrayed her, urging her to flee. But she forced herself to take a breath and approach, shaky steps bridging the distance. The men glanced at her as she arrived, smiles politely welcoming. Marcus recognized her instantly. His eyes flickered with surprise, then mild curiosity. "Miss Willoughby," he said, extending a hand. His tone was professional, not unkind. Her voice caught in her throat. She took his hand gently. "Agent Winters, hello. I had no idea you'd be here." He nodded, turning to the community leader. "Could you give us a moment?" The man nodded and stepped away, leaving them in a quiet corner of the bustling ballroom. Karen swallowed. "I've been trying to reach you," she said haltingly. "I emailed the FBI office, but I never heard back. I thought maybe they never passed the message along." Marcus tilted his head. "I've been traveling a lot. I did see your message eventually." He paused, choosing his words. "Thank you for writing it." She looked down, feeling tears prick her eyes. "Agent Winters, Marcus I, don't know if I can ever properly apologize for how I acted on that plane. I was hateful, and you saved my life, our lives. I'm so sorry. I've been trying to make amends in whatever small way I can." He studied her, eyes thoughtful. She looked different now. Her posture was no longer that of an entitled Karen. Instead, she wore humility like a fragile cloak. He said, "Everyone has bad days, but you really let your prejudices show. That can cut deep." She flinched at his honesty, yet she appreciated it. "I know," she whispered. "I can't undo what I said, but I want you to know I've been working on myself. That flight changed me. You changed me." A gentle hush settled between them, the distant clinking of glasses and hum of conversation fading into the background. Marcus broke the silence. "Apology accepted," he said, voice warm. "I'm glad you're trying to grow. That's all anyone can ask." Relief swept through her, and tears finally slipped down her cheeks. Marcus offered a small, understanding smile. He reached into his pocket and handed her a business card. "Feel free to keep in touch if you ever need to," he said, letting her know he carried no ill will. Karen thanked him, her voice wavering with emotion. In that moment, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders, the burden of guilt and shame that had haunted her since Flight 257. She might never be able to repay him, but she would commit herself to living in a way that honored the second chance she'd been given. Months later, Karen Willoughby's life had taken a radically different direction. She had poured her energy into charitable work, volunteering at youth mentorship programs and frequently donating to organizations that supported marginalized communities. Though she knew these actions didn't erase her past, they offered her a sense of purpose. She found herself genuinely enjoying the work, listening to people's stories, understanding their struggles, and recognizing that her own experiences had been comparatively privileged. The shift in perspective was humbling yet liberating. As word of her volunteer efforts spread among her social circle, a few acquaintances snickered, calling it a phase or a PR stunt. But Karen no longer cared about social gossip. She felt the powerful pull of empathy, a connection to humanity she had once lacked. In quiet moments, she remembered the terror on Flight 257, how quickly one's sense of superiority crumbled in the face of mortality, and how foolish her prejudices had been. Marcus, for his part, continued his work with the FBI. His successful handling of the hijacking incident earned him commendations and more high-profile assignments. But in quieter moments, he reflected on the encounter with Karen. He sometimes saw glimpses of her transformation on social media or through random updates from mutual acquaintances. Each time, he felt a small swell of optimism that even in the darkest crisis, something good could sprout in unsuspected hearts. One day, Karen received a letter in the mail with an official FBI seal. Her stomach flipped, worried it might be some form of ongoing inquiry. But inside, she found a simple note from Marcus, a short line about a youth outreach event where he was speaking, inviting her to come if she was interested. She smiled at the subtle extension of goodwill. Life had an odd sense of humor, forging a connection between two people who started as adversaries at best. The karmic retribution she'd experienced wasn't the vengeance of cosmic punishment, but rather the humiliating unraveling of her bigotry and the subsequent path toward redemption. She had been forced to confront her own flaws in the harshest possible way. The plane ride had shaken her to the core, but it also paved the way for a more compassionate future. Thank you for joining us on this gripping journey of fear, confrontation, and, ultimately, redemption. A single flight changed the lives of everyone on board and, in an unexpected twist, led one formerly judgmental passenger toward compassion and growth. From the tense hijacking to the heartfelt apology, this story reminds us that bravery and empathy can flourish even when conflict and prejudice threaten to tear us apart. If you found this story thrilling, shocking, or inspiring, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to our channel for more dramatic tales and uplifting transformations. We appreciate your support, and we hope to see you again soon for another captivating story.